When my boss cut my hours to force me to quit, I pressed a single button that triggered a compliance lockdown costing the company $22 million. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began and how I turned their greed into their biggest catastrophe. My name is irrelevant, but what I did will haunt Nexus Pharmaceuticals for decades. I was their senior regulatory compliance officer for 9 years, the person responsible for ensuring every drug shipment, every clinical trial, every FDA submission met federal standards. In pharmaceuticals, compliance isn't just paperwork, it's the difference between profit and prison. One mistake can shut down entire production lines, cost millions in fines, or worse, kill patients. That's why companies like Nexus pay compliance officers well and treat them like the firewall between success and destruction. Or at least, that's how it used to be. Everything changed when Marcus Brennan became our new chief operating officer. Marcus was one of those MBA types who believed every department was a cost center that needed optimization, which is corporate speak for slash and burn. He came from a tech startup background where moving fast and breaking things was celebrated. But this wasn't software, this was pharmaceuticals, where breaking things meant people died and companies faced criminal charges. I first met Marcus during his second week when he called me into his office without warning. His corner office still smelled like fresh paint and his ego, all glass walls and minimalist furniture that screamed I'm important. He didn't shake my hand, just gestured at a chair while staring at his laptop. "Sarah, right?" he said, not looking up. "I've been reviewing departmental budgets and your compliance team seems overstaffed. We're running lean now. I'm cutting your department by 40%. I felt my stomach drop. "Marcus, we're already at minimum staffing. FDA regulations require specific documentation and oversight levels. If we cut any deeper, we risk non-compliance." He finally looked at me, and his smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Then you'll need to work smarter, not harder. Welcome to the new Nexus." That meeting lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes to dismantle a compliance infrastructure that took 9 years to build. Over the next month, Marcus systematically destroyed my department. He eliminated 2 of my 5 team members, cut our budget by 60%, and outsourced critical auditing functions to a discount firm in the Philippines that didn't understand U.S. pharmaceutical regulations. When I escalated concerns to the VP of Operations, I was told to be a team player. When I documented safety risks in writing, I was called into HR for being negative and not embracing company culture. The compliance violations started immediately. Shipments went out with incomplete documentation. Clinical trial data wasn't being properly verified. Chain of custody procedures for controlled substances became suggestions rather than requirements. I worked 16-hour days trying to cover the gaps left by my terminated team members, documenting every violation, every near miss, every corner Marcus's new efficiency standards forced us to cut. Then came the Monday that changed everything. I arrived at 7 a.m. like always, already exhausted from a weekend spent catching up on backlogged compliance reports. My keycard worked, but when I logged into my computer, my access was restricted. No email, no compliance database, no FDA submission portal. I called IT, thinking it was a system error. "Your account has been modified per management request," the technician said awkwardly. "You'll need to speak with Marcus Brennan." I found Marcus in his office, same smug expression, same dismissive attitude. "Sarah, we're restructuring your role. You're being moved to part-time status, 20 hours per week, contractor classification. No benefits, obviously. Your new responsibilities will focus on basic documentation review." My heart hammered. Part-time contractor meant no health insurance, no retirement contributions, no unemployment eligibility if terminated. It meant desperation wages and zero job security. "You can't do this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My position requires full-time oversight by law. Compliance officers must be employees with fiduciary duty to the company and regulatory agencies. Contractors can't fulfill those legal obligations." Marcus leaned back in his expensive chair. "Actually, our legal team says we can structure it this way. You're welcome to accept the new terms or resign. Either way, I need an answer by end of business today. He was forcing me out, making conditions so intolerable that I'd quit, avoiding unemployment claims and severance obligations. It was calculated, cruel, and perfectly legal. I thought about my mortgage, my daughter's college tuition, my mother's medical bills I helped cover. I thought about 9 years of expertise and dedication being discarded like outdated software. And then I thought about something else. Something Marcus didn't know. When I joined Nexus 9 years ago, the company was recovering from a major FDA consent decree, a legal agreement imposed after serious compliance failures nearly shut them down. As part of that decree, Nexus was required to maintain specific compliance infrastructure, including a senior regulatory officer with full access and authority to halt any operation that posed patient safety risks. That decree was still active, monitored by the FDA, and built into our operating procedures. It included something called a Compliance Emergency Protocol, a system I'd helped design that allowed the senior compliance officer to trigger an immediate operational lockdown if they identified critical violations that posed imminent patient harm. The lockdown would freeze all manufacturing, halt all shipments, and require comprehensive third-party auditing before operations could resume. It was a nuclear option, designed to prevent another disaster. I'd never used it because I'd never needed to. Until now. I looked at Marcus with his smugness and his spreadsheets and his complete disregard for the complexity of what we did. I'll need to think about it, I said quietly. I'll let you know before end of day. He waved his hand dismissively, already focused on his laptop again. I walked back to my restricted workstation and started thinking. Not about accepting his insulting offer, not about finding a new job, but about every compliance violation I'd documented over the past 6 months under Marcus's efficiency regime. I went home for lunch, something I never did. I pulled out my personal laptop and accessed the encrypted backup drive where I kept copies of every compliance report, every safety concern, every violation I'd flagged that management had ignored. I'd maintain these backups as professional insurance, standard practice for compliance officers operating in hostile environments. What I found was worse than I'd remembered. 37 documented violations of FDA manufacturing standards, 12 instances of falsified batch records to meet shipping deadlines, 8 cases of inadequate sterility testing on injectable medications, and 4 incidents of controlled substances being shipped without proper DEA documentation. Any one of these could trigger an FDA warning letter. Together, they represented systematic noncompliance that could result in criminal charges. Marcus had built his efficiency gains on a foundation of fraud and negligence. And as the senior compliance officer, even in my final hours in that role, I had a legal obligation to report imminent patient safety risks. The Compliance Emergency Protocol was designed for exactly this situation. I spent 3 hours documenting everything in a formal compliance emergency report, cross-referencing specific FDA regulations, citing our consent decree obligations, and detailing the systematic failures under Marcus's restructuring. Then I did something that would change everything. I logged into the Nexus compliance system using my emergency override credentials that couldn't be restricted because they were mandated by the FDA consent decree. I uploaded my comprehensive compliance emergency report. And then I activated the Compliance Emergency Protocol. The system asked me 3 times if I was certain. This action is irreversible and will immediately halt all company operations pending FDA review. Confirm activation. I clicked yes 3 times. And pressed submit. What happened next was beautiful chaos. Within 60 seconds, every manufacturing line at Nexus automatically shut down. Every active shipment was flagged for recall and quarantine. Every pending FDA submission was frozen. Every employee received an automated notification that all operations were suspended pending emergency compliance review. The system sent automatic notifications to the FDA, DEA, and state pharmacy boards detailing the nature of the emergency and requesting immediate inspection. I sat in my living room watching the company's Slack channel explode on my phone. Managers were panicking. The operations team was scrambling. Someone was asking who authorized the shutdown. And then my phone rang. Marcus. I didn't answer. He called 4 more times. Then the VP of operations called. Then the CEO. I let them all go to voicemail. Instead, I drafted a formal resignation letter, effective immediately, citing hostile work environment and retaliation for raising safety concerns. I included a detailed timeline of Marcus's restructuring and its impact on compliance capabilities. I sent copies to the CEO, the board of directors, HR, and my personal attorney. Then I turned off my phone and waited. The FDA doesn't mess around with pharmaceutical compliance emergencies. They had inspectors on site within 18 hours, a full investigative team by day 2. The shutdown lasted 6 weeks while they conducted comprehensive facility inspections, interviewed employees, reviewed documentation, and assessed whether Nexus was capable of safe operations. During that time, I hired an employment attorney specializing in retaliation and whistleblower protections. I also received a call from an FDA investigator who wanted to interview me about the compliance concerns I'd raised. I told them everything, provided all my documentation, and explained how Marcus's cost-cutting had systematically undermined patient safety. 3 weeks into the shutdown, I received a letter from Nexus's legal team threatening to sue me for damages resulting from my unauthorized activation of the emergency protocol. My attorney laughed when I showed it to her. They won't sue, she said confidently. Discovery would expose everything you documented. They'd be criminally liable. This is intimidation. She was right. The lawsuit threat disappeared after my attorney sent a detailed response outlining potential whistleblower claims and FDA violations. Instead, I received a settlement offer, full severance, non-disparagement agreement, and a confidentiality clause. I declined. I wanted the truth public. The FDA's final report was devastating. They cited Nexus for 41 compliance violations, issued a warning letter requiring comprehensive corrective action, and imposed additional manufacturing restrictions under the existing consent decree. The company estimated the 6-week shutdown cost them $19 million in lost production, another $3 million in emergency auditing and corrective measures, and months of delayed product launches. Total damage, approximately $22 million. Marcus Brennan was terminated 2 days after the FDA report was released. The VP of operations who ignored my concerns resigned under pressure. The CEO faced a no-confidence vote from the board and stepped down 6 months later. Nexus hired a new compliance team, doubled the department budget, and implemented additional oversight procedures. They also reached out to me through back channels, offering me a position as Vice President of Regulatory Affairs with a substantial salary increase and contractual protections. I considered it. Then I accepted a position at their largest competitor, who valued compliance expertise and treated it as the critical function it actually was. My new role came with a 40% salary increase, full autonomy, and a seat at the executive table. I testified before the FDA as a whistleblower, helping them understand how Marcus's cost-cutting had created systematic safety risks. I consulted with 3 other pharmaceutical companies on compliance infrastructure. I spoke at industry conferences about the importance of protecting compliance functions from short-term profit pressures. And every time someone asks me about the Nexus situation, I tell them the truth. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because $22 million was exactly what it cost to ignore patient safety for quarterly profits. 6 months after the shutdown, I ran into a former Nexus colleague at a conference. She told me that 3 patients had been identified who received medications from contaminated batches that should never have shipped, medications that made it out during Marcus's efficiency regime. All 3 survived, but 1 required hospitalization. The FDA had quietly managed the situation, working with Nexus on patient notification and monitoring. Those 3 patients would have been 4 or 10 or more if the violations had continued. The compliance emergency protocol wasn't revenge. It was exactly what it was designed for, stopping a catastrophe before it happened. Marcus thought compliance was a cost center, an obstacle to efficiency, a department full of overpaid paper pushers who didn't understand business realities. What he didn't understand was that compliance officers are the last line of defense between corporate greed and human casualties. We're not obstacles, we're fire alarms. And when you ignore us, eventually something burns down. Here's what I learned from this experience. In specialized industries like pharmaceuticals, aerospace, or finance, there are functions you don't cut and people you don't threaten. Compliance and safety aren't luxuries, they're foundations. When executives from other industries parachute in with their disruption mentality and efficiency mandates, they're playing with fire they don't understand. And sometimes, the person they're bullying has access to switches they didn't know existed. Marcus cut my hours to save $200,000 in annual salary and benefits. It cost his company $22 million and his career. That's not revenge, that's mathematics. I still have the email Marcus sent me that Monday morning, the one offering me contractor status. I keep it printed and framed in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that expertise has value, that safety has priority, and that sometimes the quiet person documenting everything is the most dangerous person in the room. Last I heard, Marcus is working as a consultant for a logistics company, far away from anything involving patient safety or regulatory oversight. I hope he learned something. I doubt it. But at least he's not in a position to hurt people anymore. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. When someone with power tries to force you out for doing your job correctly, remember that sometimes doing your job correctly is the most powerful response. I didn't need elaborate schemes or secret plots. I just needed to do exactly what I was hired to do, protect patient safety and maintain compliance, even when it cost the people who wronged me everything. Because in the end, the truth is simple. Sometimes the best revenge is just doing your job right when everyone else has forgotten what that means. And sometimes, justice isn't about getting even, it's about preventing disaster and letting the consequences fall where they belong. Marcus wanted me gone to save money. I made sure he was gone to save lives. I know which one of us sleeps better at night. And that button I pressed? That compliance emergency lockdown that triggered everything? It's still there, built into systems at pharmaceutical companies across the country, waiting for the next compliance officer who needs it. Waiting for the next time some executive forgets that not everything in business is negotiable. Some things, like patient safety, are absolutes. And the people protecting those absolutes aren't obstacles to work around. We're the last line standing between profit and catastrophe. Marcus learned that lesson for $22 million. I'd call that a bargain. Because the alternative, the one where I stayed quiet and accepted his terms and let the violations continue, that would have cost lives. And no amount of money is worth that price. So when people ask if I regret activating that protocol, if I regret ending my career at Nexus and causing that massive shutdown, I tell them the same thing every time. I regret nothing. I'd do it again tomorrow. Because sometimes, the only way to stop a disaster is to trigger a controlled explosion. And sometimes, the person they're trying to silence is holding all the matches.